The sun beat down on the dusty road, a relentless golden hammer on a parched anvil. Redemption Creek was less a town and more a promise, a cluster of wooden shacks and hopeful souls huddled against the vast, unforgiving Montana landscape. For Abigail, it was just another name on a long journey, a place to rest her weary bones and find a moment of peace. The clatter of the stagecoach was a familiar, rhythmic torment, but the scent of baked dust and pine was a welcome change from the stale air of the carriage. Her cane, a thin, polished length of hickory, was her only true companion. It was an extension of her will, a divining rod for a world she could no longer see. She stepped down from the stagecoach, her hand a delicate compass, finding the hard-packed earth beneath her worn boots. The murmurs of the crowd were immediate, a low hum of curiosity and judgment. A blind woman alone, in a place like this. It was an anomaly, a vulnerable target in a land that prized strength and self-reliance. A coarse voice broke the silence. "Well, look at that, boys. A little songbird without her eyes." Laughter, harsh and tinny, followed. Abigail's face, a canvas of quiet determination, betrayed nothing. She had heard it all before. The words were stones, but her spirit was a river flowing past the obstacles. Her destination was the Saloon, the only place in town that offered lodging. She had a few dollars left from her late father's small inheritance, enough for a meal and a bed for a night or two. She navigated the short distance with practiced ease, her cane tapping a steady rhythm against the boardwalk. The swinging doors of the saloon groaned open, revealing a world of dim light, stale whiskey, and the boisterous clamor of men who had seen too much and cared too little. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust, spilled beer, and cheap cigars. A wave of voices washed over her, a cacophony of card games, arguments, and off-key singing. The moment she stepped inside, the noise didn't stop, but it shifted. A hush fell over the bar as men turned their heads, their faces a mixture of surprise and cruel amusement. A man with a thick, grisly beard and a bottle clutched in his hand pointed a greasy finger at her. "What's this? You got lost on the way to the church, little lady?" A roar of laughter erupted, the sound echoing off the rafters. The bartender, a man with a scarred face and a tired look, simply wiped the bar, pretending not to notice. Abigail ignored them, her face a mask of serene resolve. She moved towards the bar, her cane clicking with each step. "A room, if you please, and a glass of water," she said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the mockery. The bearded man pushed away from his table, swaying slightly. "You got no business in here, girl. This ain't no place for someone like you." He grabbed her arm, his grip a vice. Abigail flinched, but she didn't cry out. She stood her ground, her body tense. That's when a new voice, low and resonant, cut through the tension. "Let her go." All heads turned to a man standing in the corner, a silent observer until now. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a presence that filled the room. His hands, calloused and strong, rested at his sides. This was Caleb, a respected rancher who kept to himself, known more for his quiet strength than for his words. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, were fixed on the bearded man. The threat wasn't in his voice, but in the stillness of his posture. The bearded man hesitated, looking from Caleb to Abigail and back again. The laughter had died. A heavy silence settled in. "She ain't causing no trouble," Caleb said, his voice as steady as the mountain range outside. "A saloon is a place for all who can pay their way. Let her be." Slowly, the man released Abigail's arm. He grumbled something under his breath, but he retreated, shuffling back to his table. Abigail, her heart pounding, straightened her dress and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in Caleb's direction, a gesture of silent gratitude. Caleb simply returned to his drink, his gaze now fixed on the swirling liquid. But he had already done his part. He had stood up for her, and in a place like Redemption Creek that was a statement louder than any shout. The bartender, a sudden sense of obligation overcoming his apathy, finally spoke. "A room, you say? It'll be $1 a night, miss." Abigail paid him, her fingers counting the coins with an uncanny precision. She was handed a key, the cold metal a small comfort in her palm. The men in the saloon had gone back to their games and their drinks, but the air had changed. The taunts had been replaced with a simmering respect, a new kind of silence. The blind woman had arrived, and she was not alone. The rancher had made sure of it. The morning light, a filtered dusty orange, streamed through the single window of Abigail's small room. The floorboards creaked with age, and the air smelled of old wood and the remnants of yesterday's smoke. It was a humble space, but it was safe. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of relief. After a simple breakfast of hard biscuits and watered-down coffee, she ventured outside, her cane leading the way. Her goal was simple: find a quiet place to sit and knit. Her hands, nimble and practiced, found a rhythm in the intricate patterns of wool and yarn. Knitting was more than a hobby. It was a way of seeing. The texture of the yarn, the click of the needles, the growing shape of the shawl. It all created a world she could feel, a world she could control. She settled on a bench near the general store, a spot that caught the morning sun and offered a sense of solitude. Soon a shadow fell over her. "Mind if I sit?" It was Caleb, the rancher from the night before. His voice was as quiet as his movements. "Please," Abigail said, her hands never stopping their work. "It's a big bench." He sat down, a comfortable distance between them. The silence was not awkward, but companionable. Caleb watched her hands move, a blur of motion and purpose. "You're good at that," he said finally. "It helps me pass the time," she replied. She knew he was looking at her, not with pity or curiosity, but with a simple, genuine interest. It was a rare feeling. They spoke for a while, a slow-building conversation that began with small talk about the weather and the town's quiet atmosphere and evolved into a deeper exchange. Abigail spoke of her journey, her late father, and the small inheritance that was her only link to the past. She explained how she lost her sight after a childhood illness, a fever that took her vision but left her with an uncanny sense of her surroundings. She described how her other senses had sharpened, how she could read people not by their expressions but by the tone of their voices, the rhythm of their breathing, the faint scent of their fear or joy. Caleb, in turn, spoke of his ranch, a modest spread of land he was trying to turn into a successful cattle operation. He spoke of the loneliness of the open range, the unforgiving nature of the seasons, and the quiet satisfaction of hard work. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, they were weighted with meaning. He had come to Redemption Creek not for escape, but for a new beginning, a chance to build something of his own. Their conversation was a bridge, connecting two disparate lives. They were both outsiders in their own way, seeking to build a new life in a rugged land. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows, a fragile, unspoken alliance formed between them. It was a bond not of romance, but of mutual respect and understanding. The town of Redemption Creek was small, and news, or gossip, traveled faster than a prairie fire. The story of the blind woman and the rancher spread like wildfire. Some saw it as a strange romance, others as a cynical ploy. The man from the saloon, a local troublemaker named Jeb, was particularly resentful. He saw Caleb's intervention as a public humiliation and was determined to get his revenge. Jeb began to spread rumors. He claimed Abigail was a fraud, that she was a con artist who was faking her blindness to gain sympathy and money. He told his friends that he had seen her look at him and that she was a witch with a strange, unnatural power. These were the kinds of whispers that could poison a community, turning a quiet, peaceful person into a pariah. Abigail felt the change. The townspeople, who had initially been cautious, now averted their gazes. The smiles were gone, replaced by suspicious stares. When she went to the general store, the shopkeeper was brusque, his usual friendly chatter replaced with clipped, cold words. Children pointed and whispered behind their mothers' skirts. The weight of their judgment was a heavy cloak she had to wear everywhere she went. Caleb noticed it too. Men would fall silent when he approached, their conversations halting awkwardly. Jeb would make a point of jeering at him from across the street. "Still playing the hero, rancher? Got yourself a blind partner in crime." One afternoon, as Abigail sat knitting by the general store, Jeb and his cronies approached her. "So, you're the town's little miracle, are you?" Jeb sneered, his voice laced with venom. "Heard you got powers. Can you tell me what's in my hand?" He held something out, his voice thick with malicious intent. Abigail's hands stilled. She knew this was a test, a public performance of her supposed fraud. "I don't need to see to know what's in your heart, sir," she said, her voice steady. "And right now, it feels as empty as your threats." Jeb's face flushed with anger. "Why, you little—" He lunged forward, but a firm hand on his shoulder stopped him. It was Caleb. He had been watching from a distance, and now he was standing between them, a human shield. "Leave her alone, Jeb," Caleb said, his voice a low rumble. "This has gone on long enough." "What's it to you, rancher? You a keeper now?" Jeb retorted, trying to shrug off Caleb's hand. Caleb didn't respond with a threat. Instead, he looked at the crowd of onlookers. "A man's worth isn't in his words, but in his actions," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his convictions. "This woman has shown more strength and character than any of you could ever hope to have. The only blind people here are the ones who refuse to see it." His words hung in the air, a challenge and a judgment. The crowd, which had been silent, began to shift uncomfortably. Jeb, realizing he had lost the upper hand, scoffed and walked away, his cronies following close behind. The tension remained, but Caleb's defense had created a new crack in the town's wall of prejudice. The confrontation with Jeb had been a small victory, but it hadn't erased the underlying suspicion. Caleb knew he had to do more than just defend Abigail. He had to show the town what she was truly capable of. He came to her with an idea. "My ranch hand, old Mr. Gable, is in need of some new gloves," Caleb said. "His hands are so gnarled from the years, store-bought ones don't fit him right. You think you could make a pair using my measurements?" Abigail's hands stilled, a new sense of purpose filling her. "I could try," she said. "If you can give me the measurements, I can create the pattern in my mind." Caleb returned the next day with a length of twine and a worn-out pair of Mr. Gable's gloves. Abigail ran her fingers over the material, memorizing the texture of the leather, the worn seams, the calloused impressions inside. She had Caleb describe the exact length and width, translating his descriptions into a mental blueprint. She took out her knitting needles and a new ball of sturdy yarn. The project became a quiet mission. For the next few days, Abigail sat by the general store, her fingers flying with a renewed intensity. The townspeople watched, their curiosity piqued. Jeb and his friends would occasionally pass by and make a snide comment, but she ignored them, her focus absolute. When she was finished, she presented the gloves to Caleb. They were a work of art, thick and warm, with a unique pattern that seemed to fit the old rancher's hands perfectly. The fingers were a little longer, the palms a little wider, just as Caleb had described. He took them back to the ranch, and Mr. Gable, a grizzled old man with a heart of gold, tried them on. They fit like a second skin. He couldn't believe it. The story of the gloves spread. "The blind woman made them," people said in hushed tones, without even seeing his hands. It was a small act, but it was a tangible demonstration of her skill. It was something they could see and feel. The whispers of a con artist began to fade, replaced by a grudging respect. The peace was short-lived. A few nights later, A fire broke out at Caleb's ranch. The dry summer and an unseen spark turned a small flame into a roaring inferno. The night sky was painted a furious orange as the barn, a crucial part of his livelihood, went up in flames. The townspeople, alerted by the smoke and the distant screams of the animals, rushed to help. Caleb was already there, a silhouette against the fire, trying desperately to save his horses. The flames were a living entity, consuming everything in their path. A terrible cry came from within the barn. One of the horses was trapped inside. Abigail, hearing the distant commotion from her room, knew she had to go. She ran towards the glow in the sky, her cane a frantic metronome against the ground. She arrived just as Caleb was being pulled back by a neighbor, his face streaked with soot and despair. He had tried to get the horse out, but the heat was too intense. "There's a horse inside!" he yelled, his voice raw with panic. "The door is jammed shut!" Abigail's mind, a finely tuned instrument, began to process the sounds. She could hear the crackle of the fire, the whinnying of the trapped animal, the shouts of the men. Her extraordinary sense of sound and space took over. She could hear the subtle shifting of the barn's structure, the sound of the burning wood, and the frantic, panicked breathing of the horse. She took a deep breath. "The door is stuck on the right side," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Use a log to lever it open." Her heightened hearing had detected the subtle change in the sound of the burning wood, a different kind of stress on the timber near the door's hinge. The men, startled by her unexpected command, hesitated. Caleb, however, trusted her. "Get a log," he bellowed. They found a fallen beam and, working together, began to pry the door open. The wood groaned, and with a final splintering crack, the door gave way. The horse, a beautiful mare named Bella, bolted out, her eyes wide with terror, her coat singed but otherwise unharmed. The men cheered, a wave of relief washing over the crowd. The fire was eventually contained, but the barn was a total loss. Caleb turned to Abigail, his soot-streaked face a mixture of shock and profound gratitude. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I could hear it," she said simply, "the sound of the wood." The townspeople, who had witnessed the entire scene, were stunned. Her act of courage and her uncanny ability had saved one of Caleb's most valuable animals. The rumors of a witch were replaced by a sense of awe. This was no fraud, this was something extraordinary. The next day, as the town mourned Caleb's loss, the truth began to emerge. The fire wasn't an accident. A young boy who had been hiding in the woods came forward and confessed that he had seen Jeb and two of his friends lighting the fire. He had been too scared to say anything before, but after seeing the community come together and witnessing Abigail's brave act, he felt compelled to tell the truth. The town's sheriff, a stern but fair man named Sheriff Thompson, launched an immediate investigation. He questioned Jeb and his friends, who, after a tense interrogation, confessed to their crime. They had been trying to ruin Caleb, to get back at him for defending the blind woman. They had never intended to burn down the entire barn or risk the animals, but their malicious act had spiraled out of control. Jeb and his accomplices were arrested. The community was left in a state of shock. They had allowed their prejudices to fester, and it had almost cost a man his livelihood and an animal its life. The same people who had mocked Abigail a week before now looked at her with a mix of shame and admiration. Abigail herself felt a strange sense of vindication, but it was a somber one. The incident had cost Caleb so much. The fire had burned down his barn, a symbol of his hard work and his dreams. She knew that he was now facing an immense challenge, a financial and emotional burden that might be impossible to overcome. In the aftermath of the fire and the arrests, the town of Redemption Creek was quiet. The silence wasn't a sign of indifference, but of contemplation. People were forced to reckon with their own roles in the events. They had stood by while a good man and a brave woman were ridiculed and threatened. They had allowed hate to fester. The next morning, The saloon was a somber place. The bartender, the same man who had been apathetic when Abigail was first threatened, started a collection. "We let this happen," he said, placing a handful of coins in a jar. "Caleb stood up for one of us, and we turned our backs. We owe him." Slowly, people came forward. The shopkeeper, who had been so cold to Abigail, put a few dollars in the jar. The old woman, who had pulled her children away from Abigail, now offered a piece of her freshly baked apple pie. The community, one person at a time, began to atone. Caleb was overwhelmed. He had lost so much, but he was now gaining something more profound: the support of his community. People who had once been strangers were now his neighbors, offering to help rebuild his barn, to share their food, their labor, their time. They didn't just feel sorry for him. They felt a shared responsibility. Abigail, too, was a part of this quiet revolution. People now sought her out, not to gawk or to mock, but to talk to her, to listen to her. They asked her advice, not for a magical solution, but for her perspective, her wisdom. She became a source of inspiration, a symbol of resilience and quiet strength. She used her skills to knit gloves and blankets for those who had lost their homes in other fires, and her work became a testament to the power of human connection. The process of rebuilding the barn was a community effort. Men and women from all corners of the town came to help. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the quiet tension that had once hung in the air. The new barn was a testament to a town's changed heart. Caleb, a man who had always worked alone, found himself surrounded by friends. He learned to accept help, to share his burdens, to trust in the kindness of his neighbors. He worked side by side with them, his face covered in sawdust and sweat, but a new sense of purpose in his eyes. Abigail was a constant presence, her can-do attitude and unwavering spirit a source of motivation. She would bring food, offer words of encouragement, and even help to sort lumber by the feel of the grain and the sound it made when tapped. Her blindness, once a source of vulnerability, was now a source of wonder. The people of Redemption Creek no longer saw her as a woman who couldn't see. They saw her as a woman who saw in a way they never could. During the rebuilding, Caleb and Abigail's bond deepened. Their relationship wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was a partnership forged in adversity. They were two people who had found in each other a kindred spirit, a quiet understanding of the world and their place in it. They spoke less of their individual struggles and more of their shared dreams for a new, better future. As the new barn neared completion, Caleb and Abigail sat on a small hill overlooking the town. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of gold and purple. The sight was beautiful, but Abigail didn't need to see it to feel it. She could feel the warmth of the sun on her skin, smell the scent of the pine, and hear the gentle murmur of the town below. "They're good people," Caleb said, his voice soft. "They just needed a reminder of what that means." "We all do," Abigail replied, her hands resting in her lap. "It's easy to get lost in the darkness, but we always have a choice about how we face it." Caleb turned to her. "You helped me see that," he said. "Before you came, I was just surviving. Now I feel like I'm living." Their relationship had become a source of wonder to the town. It wasn't about pity or charity. It was about two people finding strength in each other. They had both been outsiders, but together they had found a home, not just in a place, but in each other's hearts. The day the barn was finished, the town threw a celebration. A large fire was lit not for destruction, but for warmth and community. The new barn stood tall and proud, a symbol of their collective strength and a beacon of hope. Abigail and Caleb stood together, watching the people dance and laugh. The men from the saloon, who had once jeered at her, now raised their glasses in her honor. The town, which had once been a place of prejudice, had been redeemed. Caleb turned to Abigail, a quiet sense of purpose in his eyes. "I'm not sure what the future holds," he said, But I know I don't want to face it alone. I have a new barn, a new life, and a new understanding of what it means to belong. All of that I owe to you." Abigail smiled, her face a picture of serene contentment. "You didn't owe me anything, Caleb. You chose kindness, and that is what truly saves us." Their journey had been a long one, filled with prejudice, hardship, and loss. But through it all, they had found each other. The blind woman who was mocked and thrown out of the saloon had not only found her place, but had also helped an entire town find its way back to compassion and humanity. Redemption Creek was no longer just a name on a map. It was a promise, and it was a promise that had been kept.